Trump has recently issued an executive order here in the United States to increase the production of glyphosate, all for the sake of our national security. Even more of a shocker, RFK Jr., who is known to actively oppose glyphosate, has also recently come out to endorse that move. Now, there's a lot of information out there about glyphosate, especially when it comes to our grains. There are truths and there are lies. There's a lot of misinformation out there, a lot of buzzwords that is used. So in this video, we are actually going to do a deep dive and really get to the truth of glyphosate, especially when it comes to our grains. And believe me, the truth is probably going to surprise you. Hey y'all, welcome back to Grains and Grit. My name is Felicia, and on this channel, I teach you all about real whole grains, all from a biblical perspective. I teach you how and why to be milling your own grains, baking that bread, and more. All right, so before some of y'all start shooting me an email about how I need to be staying out of politics, you don't follow me for politics, I get it. This is not a political channel. However, when politics crosses over to my field, which is grains, I'm definitely gonna talk about it because I need to inform y'all of what's going on. Okay, so what's been happening in the news lately is that President Trump has come out and signed an executive order demanding that companies increase the production of both phosphorus and glyphosate, all for the sake of our national security. The reason why phosphorus has to be increased is because apparently phosphorus is also used in the production of glyphosate, so you kind of need both. So it's an increase in both. So that was already a shock that he came out with that, but what was even more shocking was that RFK Jr. came out and actually endorsed that move, which was a huge blow to people in the MAHA camp, the Make America Healthy Again camp, because one of the things that he stated early on was that he was wanting to, in essence, get rid of glyphosate, or at least we need to be addressing the use of it. We need to scale back on it, whatever the case may be. It was definitely glyphosate is bad. In fact, he was one of the attorneys of that lawsuit years ago where Monsanto actually ended up paying millions of dollars for the link between glyphosate, which you may know as Roundup, linking that to cancer. He was one of the attorneys that fought against Monsanto for that. So he's definitely known that glyphosate is not good. So it's very surprising if he thinks that that actually is not healthy for Americans to consume. Why is he endorsing this move of Trump's? And so the internet and everyone is absolutely freaking out about this. And that's why that we're talking about this, because one of the main reasons that people say that we should not be consuming wheat especially is because all wheat is contaminated with glyphosate. It's a big to-do. Before we dive in, I can't help myself. I got to put on my tinfoil hat here because I just have some questions about what's going on. So first of all, the fact that Trump has invoked the Defense Production Act of 1950, which was done during the Korean War, which basically tells companies, hey, stop producing for domestic Americans. You need to increase whatever it is because the soldiers need it. We're fighting a war. Last time I checked, we're not at war. It's an interesting act for him to say the fact that we need to increase glyphosate for national security issues. So that has me a little concerned about that. Who is he at war with? Are you planning on going to war soon? A little concerning there. The second thing is actually the fact that one of the things in the executive order that he pointed out, part of why this defends our national security, is because only one company produces glyphosate in the United States. And if we attack glyphosate, if we, limit its use, things like that, that would cause farmers to then go outside of the country to get their glyphosate. And I find this interesting because the only company that produces glyphosate, you may know it as Roundup, that is Monsanto, which several years ago was purchased by Bayer. It is now Bayer Monsanto. And Bayer spends about $8 million plus a year lobbying Washington. And Bayer also makes pharmaceutical drugs, now things like aspirin we all know about, but also drugs for chemotherapy. So they're now they own a company that is the only producer of glyphosate, which has been supposedly linked to cancer, and they sell the drugs that people use if they have cancer, and they've lobbied millions of dollars in Washington. So you put all those pieces together, but just a little interesting to me, and I have to put my tinfoil hat on for that information. Follow the money, y'all. Follow the money. Okay, you'll be happy to know we're setting aside politics for the most part, but I couldn't help myself. I had to ask those questions. I can't help it. All right, so here's what we're going to talk about in this video. One, just a brief, what is glyphosate, what it's used for, how is it used when it comes to wheat, what are the crops it's used on, does it actually impact our health, and then of course, what can be done about this, what can we actually do? All right, so first and foremost, what is glyphosate? So again, I've already mentioned that you may actually know glyphosate more by its trademark name, which is Roundup. That was released to us by Monsanto back in 1974. Glyphosate was actually invented or discovered in the 1950s, but marketed as a weed killer in 1974 by Monsanto for Roundup. And that's pretty much the main thing that it's used for. People loved it because it was revolutionary, killed weeds, and it does do a great job at killing the weeds. I will say that. It will kill the things. People have also discovered that it can be used as a desiccant, which actually can dry certain crops up when it comes to harvesting. We'll get into more about that later on, but predominantly it's a weed killer. That's what we know it for. Okay, so let's actually look about it, how it's used on wheat. This is one of the biggest arguments that people make that we should not be consuming wheat is because it's so contaminated with glyphosate. Now, an interesting study has actually recently been done by actually my First Lady of the state of Florida. This was a study recently done by my First Lady of Florida. She is the wife of our governor, Ron DeSantis, and she actually recently did a study where they tested different popular loaves of breads that can be just found in the grocery store, specifically for glyphosate, and the results were actually surprising. Now, you can actually view this chart on exposingfoodtoxins.com. They've also tested some other foods as well, but here's the chart that you can see up here of the levels of glyphosate found in bread. Now, this is measured as parts per billion, and the ones in yellow are the ones that tested positive. Now, what is actually very surprising to me is Dave's Killer Bread, which is an organic bread, actually still tested positive for glyphosate. Now, it's testing at 10.38 and then 11.85 parts per billion, but still the fact that glyphosate was found in a bread that is labeled organic is actually quite alarming. Now, the Environmental Working Group has their own safety levels of how much glyphosate that we can safely consume each day, and that is at 160 parts per billion of glyphosate a day. And as you can see back on this chart here, just the bread alone, and many of these breads, is getting you over that amount. And just the bread, we're not talking about other ways that glyphosate can contaminate your food. So this is certainly alarming. It was even shocking that it was found in the organic breads. But then also I want to know, like, what's Sara Lee Artisanal White and the Farmhouse Hardy White doing from Pepperidge Farm, considering they were not getting any level of detection of glyphosate. So this whole thing was actually very shocking. Not gonna lie. It can also be very concerning. So again, many of these were at very high levels of glyphosate parts per billion. So yes, by this study, it definitely looks like absolutely, avoid wheat so you can avoid glyphosate contamination. However, it is not as simple as that, because surprisingly, only 30 to 33% of acres in the United States used to grow wheat are using glyphosate. Only 30 to 33% of acres that grow wheat here in the United States even use glyphosate, period. But only 3% of wheat farmers are actually spraying the wheat directly with glyphosate. And the reason they do that is because it dries it out enough where you can harvest it. So if it's been a very, very wet year and it's time to harvest, but the wheat has not quite dried out, they can spray it with glyphosate, it dries it out, and they can harvest it. That's the reason why. But only 3% of wheat is actually directly sprayed with glyphosate. So how is it that these bread products are scoring so high with glyphosate, and why is it even organic products are testing for glyphosate levels? And that is because it leads to problem number 3 with the whole wheat and glyphosate debate. And that is because that wheat is by far not the problem crop when it comes to glyphosate. The 3 top crops used in the United States that are actively sprayed with glyphosate are soybeans, corn or maize, and cotton. Now, you can say that we don't ingest cotton, we shouldn't worry about that, but remember that many oils are a cottonseed oil, so you still got to think about it. In 2025, glyphosate was the foundational herbicide used in these 3 crops. In fact, 90%, over 90% of soybean, corn, and cotton are genetically modified in order to withstand being sprayed with glyphosate. That's why it was originally called Roundup Ready soybeans, is because these soybeans were genetically modified in order to be able to be sprayed with Roundup glyphosate so they don't die. So all 3 of these crops have been genetically modified to not die with glyphosate or Roundup. And so they are pretty much all sprayed with glyphosate. And if you don't already know how much these products are in our food, it is alarming. I would say wheat is not the huge problem, but we're going to cover both sides of that argument. Okay, so why we're actually not talking about corn being sprayed with glyphosate, because 80 to 90% of processed foods in the United States contain corn products, just the corn products alone. Again, you also have like cottonseed oil and things, or soybean oil, especially like in your mayonnaise that you buy from the store. Turn around, it's usually soybean oil. So a huge amount of, especially our processed foods, contain corn, soybean, or cotton oil, those type of things. And 60 to 70% of diet in the United States is made up of highly processed foods. This is quite alarming. So that's why, absolutely, yes, why we need to be alarmed by the use of glyphosate, and why there definitely needs to be steps done to reduce, if not eliminate, glyphosate. But it is a huge part, but I would say we're not getting it so much from the wheat. We're getting it probably more from corn, soybeans, and cotton. So I find it very interesting that even though I tell people that we should be milling our own wheat, why they still freak out that we need to still be avoiding wheat, because all wheat is sprayed with glyphosate. And that just frankly is not true. It's just not true. It's blatantly not true. You have more concern over anything with corn, soybean, and cotton than you do with the wheat. However, I did do a deep dive video with this, with glyphosate and wheat. And with that being said, you do need to be concerned about what other crops may be grown there, where wheat is also grown. Because say they swap it out and they're growing cotton or they're growing corn and they're putting glyphosate on that gets into the soil. And then when they grow wheat, they may not be using it on their wheat, but if it's already in the soil, it can get on the wheat. And there's also the cross-contamination issue. I think that that's possibly why brands like Dave's Killer Bread was still testing for glyphosate, why people who eat an all-organic diet can still have glyphosate in their system, is because unfortunately, depending on where they're grown, if their neighbor is spraying with glyphosate, unfortunately, that can still get over to them. Or maybe it's coming through the water that they're using. It's kind of more of a complicated issue, which I'll kind of get into a bit later. But I think that's why even organic brands, why they are testing for glyphosate, is because of that just pure contamination issue that glyphosate has caused. Okay, which leads to the next point, and this is glyphosate actually a health risk for us? Now, I think many of us would say, yeah, it is. But let's actually dive in, because I do want to show you both sides that people are stating. So here's the biggest thing, is when you find a study whether glyphosate is linked to cancer or causes cancer, there are conflicting information. It all depends on which agency is doing it. Other agencies that actually do their own independent studies are showing that there is a link or causation with glyphosate to cancer. And that's why right now Bayer Monsanto is paying out a whole lot of money to lawsuits with cancer, with glyphosate linking to cancer. Absolutely, I do believe that glyphosate is bad and we want to stay away from it at all costs. However, whenever you get into research and seeing like how long is glyphosate actually in the soil, because like I said, a concern is, okay, so what if a wheat farmer then switches over to want to be organic, or say like a corn farmer and they want to switch over to organic corn? Well, if they've been using glyphosate in their soil, how long is that actually going to be in their soil, and how long is it going to contaminate the products that the food that they grow in the future? And again, this is the part that I think is the most confusing that people need to understand, because glyphosate, technically speaking, is not labeled as a forever chemical like many of the microplastics are, where they are stating that glyphosate, when used in soil, is actually broken down by the soil and can be gone in as little as like a month to up to 6 months. So that's what certain studies are showing, that see glyphosate, it's okay because it does break down in the soil and eventually will be gone, and it's broken down by bacteria. However, this is very similar to how they do studies with vaccines, is you can study something independently, but in real life, this is not used necessarily independently. So for example, one vaccine could be studied and shown, hey, it's safe and effective, but it's never studied when it's also combined with another vaccine that's given at the same time, or like 5 additional vaccines at the same time. So those are the problems with these type of studies, is it's not kind of being tested for real life. Same thing with glyphosate, is they study that, but interesting studies are coming out, like this one up here that I will list, and all sources I will be linking below for y'all, so you can check them out as well. But this was very interesting, something that has been done, a study that was done in Sri Lanka, and this came out in 2023. So they've shown that tens of thousands of people have succumbed to a kidney disease. They actually call it CKDU, a kidney failure due to unclear causes. It's in a rural place in Sri Lanka. Long story short, they tested the wells of that area, and the wells that were in the center of the highest amount of kidney disease had 40% higher amounts of glyphosate tested in the water wells, as opposed to the outer regions, which were testing around 8%. And this is after glyphosate has been banned from Sri Lanka. They're actually not allowed to use it. And what they found was, when glyphosate makes contact with things like magnesium and calcium, which are found in hard water, it basically becomes a super compound and now does not break down in a month to 6 months. It now can be in the soil for up to 22 years, or in the water for up to like 7 years. Surprise! So that is probably why that even organic farmers might be having glyphosate on their wheat, because if they live in an area with hard water and it's getting in the water, it is binding with magnesium and calcium, why we're still finding it in our crops that technically should be organic. And it's not just the wheat, it's also like fruits and vegetables and things like that. So this is something, again, that definitely is a concern. But this leads to our final thing, which is, what in the world can we do about it? Unfortunately, we do have glyphosate. We've had it for decades, and I can't tell you if it's really going away or not. As of right now, it's not going away. So what can we actually do about it? And this is why I say, I still come back and circle around to, you need to be milling your own wheat. And that is because you have so much more control with where you get your wheat from than as if you were to buy the bread in the store. Because the bread in the store, even the organic ones, you still don't know where the wheat is coming from. And certain farmers, some of them actually choose to test for levels of like lead or arsenic or things like that. And then other farmers are just good organic farmers that have been doing this for a while and really taking care of their soil. And that is farmers like 4 Generations Organic Farms, which is the sponsor of this video. They are actually my go-to farmers to get my hard red and hard white wheat berries from, and I use them all the time. The reason why I love them so much is that they are organic farmers, which means they are not even allowed to use glyphosate, but they're also using regenerative farm practices, which is building the health of their soil. So as I said earlier, that bacteria in the soil actually breaks down any glyphosate. And so the healthier your soil is, the better it's going to be able to process and break down any nasty chemicals that may have been used in that soil. Now, they have been organic farmers for quite a while now, so they really have a great build buildup of good, healthy soil, that they are continuing to do so. And the healthier the soil is, the better the crop is. And so I do highly recommend that you check them out, especially if you are in fear of glyphosate. There is still hope by buying and supporting our American farmers, especially our organic American farmers that are choosing to not use glyphosate when it comes to their wheat. So just check them out. It's grainsandgrit.com/4generations. Use this coupon code here for 10% off your first order. And thank you so much to 4Generations for not only being a farmer that doesn't use glyphosate, but also sponsoring Grains and Grit. All right, so that's the biggest thing, y'all, is just to really get to know your farmer, no matter the crop that it is. I still like corn, okay? I like grits and I like cornbread. And so I'm making sure that I'm buying organic corn where I can find it. And I'm buying organic wheats like from 4Generations and others to make sure that they are taking care of their soil, that they're not using glyphosate. And you can ask them all of these questions. Contact a wheat farmer or whatever grain that you're looking for and ask them these questions. Do they use glyphosate? In between growing wheat, are they using glyphosate on other crops that can still get into their soil and therefore affect the wheat? So these are questions that you can ask. And when you're milling your own grains yourself, we have that flexibility because we are not reliant on big corporations, and good luck getting a hold of them and asking these questions. Just ask your farmer directly. Hopefully this kind of dispelled some myths and answered some questions in regards to glyphosate, especially when it comes to our grains. And if you are actually wanting to learn how to be milling your wheat and baking that beautiful loaf of bread, just check out this video here. This is my simple yeast bread loaf recipe, my ride or die go-to bread recipe that I use for like everything. And as always, I hope that y'all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next week. Bye.